Hello and welcome to this Evidencia learning event, Driving Transformations in Coffee Through Collaborations. So today, this event has been delivered in partnership with FACS. So that is the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community, and also with the Global Coffee Platform. This has very much been a collaborative effort. So yeah, thank you to all the partners involved in the organization. So whilst people are still trickling into the event, I'm going to provide a really quick overview of Evidencia. So Evidencia's USP is really to use evidence to inform sustainability action. So we do that in a number of different ways. Our online platform of easily accessible resources holds lots of different types of evidence. And our goal is really to try and ensure that credible research and evidence positively influences sustainable commodity production. So we host a lot of different online resources via our platform. We also have different channels and ways of disseminating the knowledge. So we host learning events like today's. We have a newsletter, and we also have social media channels, both X and LinkedIn, that we update regularly. So we have quite a packed agenda today. Let's go on to the session. And before that, we're really proud to be supported by SECO, Follow and CGIAR. So what is needed to create transformational change in the coffee sector? So today we have a really fascinating session. Before kind of going into any of the details, just want to make people aware that there is interpretation available in Spanish, that is. So si eres hispanohablante, bienvenido. Hay interpretación disponible haciendo clic en el globo. Brill. So we have lots of speakers today for this hour session. So kicking us off, we're going to have Melissa Salazar from UNDP and Lauren Weiss from the Global Coffee Platform. And they're really going to introduce this topic. So there was a report released last year going over learnings from a 2021 UNDP and Global Coffee Platform facilitated multi-stakeholder dialogue in coffee exporting countries. So this was a really fascinating series. And there were lessons from 8 case studies, and these were global and national coffee leaders that were focused on. And so we're very lucky to be joined by 2 of those case studies today, both Michael de Groot from Rabobank Foundation and George Watane from the Global Coffee Platform. So finally, we have a real expert in the area, Niels Hack, who is Director for Sustainable Coffee Partnerships at Conservation International, and he's going to be offering some reflections on the session and some of the speakers. So we have 15 minutes of protected time at the end of the session for all the audience questions. So there is a Q&A function and also a chat. Please feel free to pepper that Q&A with questions for the speakers, and we'll get around to answering as many as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce first Melissa Salazar from UNDP, who's then going to quickly introduce her colleague Lauren Weiss afterwards. I should say not colleague, but yeah. Okay, so over to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Matthew. And you're going to show the slides? Perfect. Okay, so thank you, Matthew. As he mentioned, today we're going to discuss about the sector transformation in coffee exporting countries report. Next slide, please. So basically, let me give you a little bit of background about the report. So many of you might be familiar with the ICO Coffee Public-Private Task Force, which was created out of the London Declaration, with the goal of addressing the coffee price crisis, and it was tasked with identifying solutions and actions to the long-term price and income challenges that many farmers face. It was operationalized through 5 technical work streams, which deal with topics such as living income, landscapes, and market transparency. One of them is technical workstream 3, which looks at market policies, institutions, and international funding mechanisms. And this technical workstream was divided into 2 forums, one on importing countries and the other one, which is the forum on sector transformation in exporting countries. Next slide, please. One back, please. So the technical workstream is facilitated by UNDP and the Global Coffee Platform, and it focuses on establishing or strengthening multi-stake. The other one, please. Perfect. So yeah, focuses on establishing or strengthening multi-stakeholder spaces with the goal of fostering collaborative action that can trigger change within the coffee sectors in exporting countries to meet the challenges of the future. The technical workstream 3 exporting countries got started with a series of dialogues throughout 2021. And through this dialogue series, they looked at different key topics in the global coffee sector, such as reducing vulnerability, financing, and supply chain efficiency. And they explored these topics through a few different case studies, which, as Matthew mentioned, we're going to delve into 2 of them today. And we're also going to look at what has happened since we first explored them in 2021. The lessons and best practices from the dialogue series were collected in the Sector Transformations in Coffee Exporting Countries report. Next slide, please. So some of the main learnings and best practices from the dialogue series were the following. So the first one was really the need to build on what already exists, not to reinvent the wheel, basically to build on existing institutions, platforms, and spaces. Then the need for consistent effort and engagement. Then the need for true collaboration across the value chain. Also the need to rethink and reconsider the traditional roles and responsibilities. And an important emphasis on really action being locally led, owned, and driven in order for it to be more sustainable and embedded. Next slide, please. Basically, also, I wanted to talk to you about what has happened since the dialogue series. So at the end of the dialogue series, there were 4 countries that requested the support from the technical working 3 exporting countries facilitators because they were interested in the approach of establishing or strengthening multi-stakeholder spaces for the coffee sector. These countries were Honduras, Mexico, Papua New Guinea, and Rwanda. And actually this year we had 2 multi-stakeholder co-creation workshops in Mexico and Rwanda. And in both of these places, we had over 50 representatives from across the coffee value chain of both countries, really working together where they reconfirmed their interest in a multi-stakeholder space for their country and how they saw value in it, the objectives for such a space, and how it could potentially be structured. We also worked with the Ministry of Economic Development in Honduras to co-develop a concept note on this same topic of multi-stakeholder collaboration in the coffee sector. Next slide, please. Some of the expected outputs of this work between the technical 3 exporting countries and the coffee exporting countries is that hopefully from this work, they'll be able to locally develop or update national coffee sustainability plans and strategies, and also that their nationally owned convening spaces or platforms for the coffee sector will either be established or strengthened, and that they can be used to create sector-wide responses to new challenges such as the new due diligence regulation that is coming from the EU, but also from other other importing countries, and also so that they can develop public-private collective actions and partnerships that help address the key challenges in the national coffee sectors. I'm now going to ask Lauren to please talk a little bit about how GCP has brought the lessons forward from this dialogue series into its work with the National Coffee Platform Network.
Wonderful. Thank you, Melissa. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. To begin with a just very brief introduction for those of you on today's call who are not familiar with the Global Coffee Platform, or GCP, We are a membership-based organization representing stakeholders across the coffee value chain. So from producers and co-ops through traders, exporters, roasters, retailers, civil society, certification schemes, etc. So as Melissa has just explained, GCP works with UNDP to co-facilitate the ICO's Technical Workstream 3 on exporting countries, which, since the release of the report and dialogue series, has focused its work on facilitating the creation of the multi-stakeholder discussions in key coffee origins. In addition to these efforts, as Melissa just referred to, GCP has also taken the findings of this report and dialogue series forward by incorporating them into its 2030 strategy. To address the systemic issues the coffee sector faces, from farmer poverty to climate change, we know that individual projects and supply chain approaches will not be sufficient on their own. So the report discusses the need to complement such efforts by working collectively to tackle these challenges. This collective action approach is foundational to GCP's work at the country level. As you can see on the slide in front of you, it's the basis of one of the tiers of GCP's two-part strategy to 2030. So to promote working collectively, GCP also builds on the report's lessons around the need to strengthen existing coffee platforms, consistent engagement, and locally driven action. This is done by and through supporting existing national coffee sustainability platforms to further strengthen their convening and programming efforts and make these even more strategic. This is currently being achieved with the platforms of 6 major coffee exporting countries by developing and executing plans for achieving farmer prosperity. Each country platform has identified the key strategies to be implemented collectively and pre-competitively to address the barriers that currently are preventing farmers from being more prosperous. So, to summarize, collective action is how we will be able to scale up the solutions identified in the report's case studies and achieve the transformational change for the coffee sector at large, because this allows for increased alignment in the sector and the pooling of resources to maximize impact. The case study speakers today, who were also featured in the report, will dive into 2 different examples of how to create lasting systemic impact that's not limited to individual projects or supply chains. The speaker from Kenya in particular will illustrate how the GCP country plans for farmer prosperity that I just referred to are also starting to be implemented. So with that, I now pass the mic back to Matt to introduce the case studies.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And yeah, really looking forward to having both you and Melissa back for the panel. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Michael de Groot, who is an investment manager, a rural fund investment manager at Rabobank Foundation. So he's going to dive into some of those learnings, and he was mentioning before as we were speaking that he's very much focused on practical kind of solutions on the ground. So we're really looking forward to hearing some of those. Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much. Quite a challenge. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Let me try to bring the statements of both speakers together. I mean, I've written down 3 major points: transformational change, collaboration, pre-competitive collaboration, and it should be beyond individual states or individual supply chain sectors. I would really like to give from the practice really how we're working on it as Rabobank and various entities, and working together with the different coffee actors. One of them is we have created a new facility for smallholders' livelihoods. So it goes beyond only financing the coffee inputs. It really goes on livelihood income, and it goes on what's further needed on climate change adaptation. So it was a facility just created end of last year worth 25 million. And then, of course, you probably see that everyone in the value chain is looking at each other and say, wow, that's risky. I'm not going to take the risk alone. So basically, how you form it is you get the actors together, which means the several buyers of the coffee said, okay, we're going to chip in a certain facility. We find other actors together who can manage this facility, which means what's now blended finance. Blended finance is not a new way of donation, of a new way of former state development banks. Blended finance is finding different investors with different agendas on moving this forward with a common goal that we want to improve the coffee sector in a sustainable manner and a long-lasting manner. So that was organized together, and it's working now in 3 countries, rolling out in 10 countries. But still, it's limited to some front runners. And as was said by the Global Coffee Platform, we want to have a very sector broad change. I would like to borrow an example from another sector, which is soy. It just has been released last week. And it's highly interesting because what happened? Normally you would say, oh, soy, it's a bulk commodity, whereas coffee is much finer and gourmet and beautiful, etc., etc. But it's very interesting because especially in a bulk commodity where you have cost drivers and low prices, everyone is very sharp on prices. So what happened here, very interesting, in Brazil, so a lot of deforestation. What happened here was there was an enormous power, a push from 3 major retailers, supermarket chains in the UK, and they said, listen, our consumers want to have a responsible soy, which is really non-deforestation, non-peat, and we want to have a good type of soy, what they're using. So these 3 supermarkets came together. They asked their traders and the processors, okay, can you help us generating and really improve this value chain? So there were more retailers, more buyers together, and organizing a multi-stakeholder facility in Brazil, managed by a third party, so being independent, monitored by even 5 or 6 environmental specialized organizations, where that was all right. And they went to 150 farmers. I mean, soy is a large-scale product, and really developing a facility which gave, of course, financial incentives to these farming households to improve the whole soy production according to the latest standards, fulfilling these new EUDR regulations, not only against deforestation, but also improving biodiversity, soil regeneration, water management completely. And this whole has been set up under a multi-stakeholder facility. And that's something I think is very interesting to learn from. It just published recently last week, and it's very interesting to learn from, to use that mechanism for the coffee sector, where you can bring people together, when you can bring all the companies together in a pre-competitive collaboration, because we have the same goal, not only lower deforestation, but we really need to lower emissions. We really need to improve biodiversity and this living income for farmers. Without living income for farmers, we're nowhere. We can say that they have to do things, but if we don't work with them, it doesn't go anywhere. So for the moment, I think I'll keep it there, Matthew.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, and really interesting to hear that you mentioning living income as well as a really important piece of the puzzle. So yeah, look forward to having you back at the end of the session as part of the Q&A. So please, if anyone has questions for Michael, do pop them in the Q&A function, and we'll get around to answering them afterwards. So now I'm going to introduce George Watane. He is the Kenya Country Platform Manager at the Global Coffee Platform, and he's going to also, share some of his case study insights. So over to you, George.
Thank you very much, Matt, and I'm sure we can all see my screen now, hopefully so. So I'll just give a quick update on the case study that we had, and also how far we are in the process of moving on from where we started. So just for those that don't know, I know Lauren talked about, working on the countries, about the different platforms that we have, and Kenya Coffee Platform is one of such, established way back in 2017. It's open to representative organizations of different stakeholders, and is managed through a national steering committee that, of course, involves, the private sector, that's farmers and the ones that do trade with them, the government, and then there's the third sector, which is the NGOs. Of course, the platform came back, to look at a common problem, but not only looking at it as a problem, but also as an opportunity. So we have very high quality and competitively priced coffee, which is an opportunity. But there is little return in the farmers' pockets, which of course can tend to become a bit of a problem. And the question was why, and how we use a macro approach to try and solutions that then at the end of the day ensure there is money in the farmers' pockets. So, of course, we rely a lot on proper information for decision making. But as you can see, when we compare ourselves with our nearest neighbors, that is Uganda on the west and Ethiopia on the north, we ask ourselves, all other factors held constant, why is it that everyone else is looking up and we're looking down? So when the platform was set up, I think we realized the solution is really to look at how do we address those issues in a macro way. So, of course, by developing a clear roadmap on how we deal with this issue. Then at the very beginning of the platform, we were grateful to some of our supporters like GIZ in helping us do a study on the economic viability of coffee farming and processing, because we really wanted to understand, is it really viable or not? And of course, evidence from that showed it's viable, but we need to think about, the productivity, but also the efficiency of wet processed and wet processed either by plantations or in groupings. Then the other issue was also to ensure there is collective knowledge and available knowledge so that then we can use the best-in-class knowledge to move forward. And then last but not least, because like I mentioned, most of the farmers do things together in cooperatives, ensuring that there is proper governance so that there is more efficiency in the process. And this comes in through one of our strategic sharing along the value chain. So ensuring that there are proper studies and clarity, and then also proper roadmaps in terms of dealing with some of the challenges. So when we look at availing knowledge, Lauren mentioned at the beginning, the fact that at a global level, we look at a reference code on coffee sustainability, but then breaking that down at a local level and then ensuring that data is available. So when you look at some of the things we did on this knowledge was the economic viability study that I just mentioned. But then in terms of ensuring the knowledge is available, the Kenya Coffee Sustainability Manual developed with partners then becomes the tool that then people can use in then ensuring that they're making more money. Then, of course, there is also proper setting of targets. And in our country plan since then, we've looked at the problem of decreasing productivity, and also not to forget there are other issues like climate change, inefficient cooperatives, but then putting solutions forward, alignment of development efforts, increasing both productivity and diversification, but also one of the ones that was part of the case study for this activity was the issue of price transparency and ensuring that as much as possible there is efficiency in the value chain and the farmer gets a fair share of that supply chain. And again, with the goal of really looking at reducing the living income gap for many of the farmers. And since, as you've seen in the graph I showed before, the productivity is really low, or by ensuring that then we are optimizing that productivity. So, of course, there are some key strategies, but the key one for the case study that we did, as I mentioned, is, of course, increasing productivity and resilience. So there's a bit more money, but also increasing transparency to translate in productivity increase and more income. So just to show what has happened since then, we needed to contextualize what more income is for the farmer by looking at first by benchmarking that to living income. It doesn't mean the farmer is prosperous when they're earning living income, but then at least it gives us a place to put as a measure when we are looking at that. So we had a study on a living income assessment for one of the counties, a pilot study, and coming up with a living income benchmark, but also determining how far the farmers are from that benchmark. And then asking ourselves, what are some of the things that we can do to bridge that gap? Because at the end of the day, like we mentioned in our case study, ours was to ensure there is efficiency, but how much more of that value can the farmer take in? The other thing we realized is also when we talk about income, everyone is just talking about the price. And as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, Kenyan coffee is quite competitively priced, but we know, of course, there is never enough money for that. But the other thing was really to ask ourselves, also get back to ourselves before we go into the outside and ask ourselves, given the prices that we are receiving, how transparent is it? How efficient is the chain? And then also, how do we remove some of the inefficiencies that we can remove to ensure that the farmer is getting more? So on the other side of the chain, I'm sharing some of the work we are doing in terms of traceability for increased transparency, just working with the platform that we have, which is the Nairobi Coffee Exchange, where about 80% of Kenyan coffee is traded, working with that platform to try and see whatever prices that the farmers are getting, how does that translate to some of the things that we had contextualized under the living income, and how efficient is the share of that in the value chain, and what can be done, and how do we ensure, first, of course, the farmer has information about what is happening. So also putting farmer-friendly ways of them realizing at this price, what does that mean? But also putting into context, at this price, with my low productivity, what can I do to do that? So those are some of the things that we've continued to do so far. And again, this is through the context of, one, looking at the problem, then two, getting members to work together to get the solution, then getting clear strategies and reporting on that. And then, of course, last but not least, ensuring we are getting to the goal, which is the goal of getting thriving farmers in the coffee supply chain. And of course, reducing that gap, and if possible, even removing it, because we believe getting to living income is one step towards the journey of ensuring farmers thriving and prosperous. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Hi, George. Thank you so much. That was really, really insightful. And again, looking forward to having you back in the Q&A session to round off today's event. But those were some really interesting findings. We've had a couple of questions through on the chat for you, which we'll get around to answering toward the end. So now I'm going to introduce our final speaker, Niels Hack. And really, so Niels Hack is the Director for Sustainable Coffee at Conservation International. And really, we've invited Niels to reflect on some of these learnings today and really see how the lessons from the report can be applied in a broader context. So over to you, Niels.
Thanks so much. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. And great to see so many familiar faces. Yeah, as mentioned, so as Conservation International, we work in coffee at multiple levels. We work directly with farming communities to promote protection alongside sustainable production. We work bilaterally with corporate partners to embed science-based decisions in sustainability strategies. And most relevant to this conversation, we work through several multi-stakeholder initiatives to around this idea of sector transformation. We do that particularly through the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, which was launched back in December 2015 as a collaborative initiative with the vision to make coffee the world's first sustainable agricultural product. We don't shy away from lofty vision. So now it's a matter on how do we actually deliver on that. And I think the report and also what we heard from George and Michael have some very valuable insights into some of those components around sector transformation. And it really reinforces to me that idea that we cannot maintain the status quo to address some of the challenges facing the industry. And we really need ambitious commitments, radical collaboration, and unprecedented investments. Particularly two things that jump out to me from George and Michael's intervention was from George is the relevance and the importance of agenda setting at the national level, and creating that enabling environment, such a critical role to set the agenda within producing countries, like around topics like living income or now meeting deforestation legislation. Bringing together stakeholders at the national level is critical there to raise awareness, but also put the mechanisms and elements in place to really translate some of these visions, some of these plans into action. And then one of the elements that Michael brought forward, and the example of the work of retailers in soy, is a very important one. I think we all talk a lot about free competitive collaboration, public-private partnerships, but I think we need to take that a step further in terms of really having companies put aside their competitive advantages and really, as competitors, step into collaborations. And this example of the retailers in the UK, like direct competitors coming together around some of these collaborations where they can really reach a scale on topics that there shouldn't be competition around. So I think that is very critical. Now, how do we take some of these lessons and the ideas from the report into our work? I think a couple of elements in our work, a key starting point, entry point in how we drive that sector transformation is an element of strengthening demand and really unlocking some of those demand signals from the industry. So making sure that industry players and other organizations across the supply chain have very clear public targets and public commitments that drive incentives throughout the supply chain. So that is, to me, one, that we know that ultimately at farm level where we want some of these changes to be made, that those investments in time and resources and changing of practices, new production systems is met with the right incentives and the markets to offtake some of those coffees. And then secondly, a very important component to us is that there are all these different initiatives and platforms, all working at different levels and scales, be it at the global level through the ICO or the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, the Global Coffee Platform, the national level platforms. But how do we take that to the next step to translate some of those plans to a landscape level, so to the more subnational level, to make sure that national level action plans don't get stuck at the national level and global agendas don't get stuck at the global level, but that they actually trickle down to the field and to the landscape, where we look beyond only the supply chain, but look at the broader landscape level efforts that are needed and how to bring stakeholders together around the table in those landscapes where there might be competing interests in terms of cocoa and coffee in the same supply chain, in the same landscape, or natural resources that we want to protect with production elements. So those are some of my takeaways from the report and the interventions just now. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, really, really great to hear your reflections, Niels. And I'm pleased to say that we have lots of time left on the agenda now for questions. So they've been firing into the chat and the Q&A. So please do keep them coming. But I'm now going to invite all the speakers to turn on your cameras and join us whilst we take some questions from the audience. So, Michael, I'm going to start off with a question for you that has come from Mauricio. So he's been really interested in the soy example that you provided and asked, were the supermarket chains that were involved in kind of joining forces to improve worker conditions and guarantee environmental quality in plantation areas? So he was wondering how they actually communicated these to their customers. Was there joint communication? And also kind of wondering what was actually the moment and the conditions that spurred that joint action.
Wow, thank you very much. Forgive me if I look silly. I'm just reading on my right side the webinar chat. That's why I look sometimes a bit. I'm reading. Thank you very much, Mauricio. How interesting and how in depth, how strong. But true, I love the example. It's been officially just last week, so it's official. Afterwards, I will share where you can find it. I hope where you can find it on it. Very interesting. Actually, what happened, if I may be so blunt and direct, I think the biggest force and strongest force were the consumers. So UK, if you look at fair trade, for example, then three countries, there is US, there is UK, and there is Europe. So UK still has 29-30% on consumers really buying and being concerned. So they were really pushing these three major supermarket chains, really serious major supermarket chains, on, okay, listen, I want to have more, at least I want to have a certain proof that the soy is not from deforested areas or not ruining anything else, like totally degraded lands and everything. I want to have a proper soy. So that was actually the first push factor, or if you want, pull in the value chain. So they went to the traders, the major traders. And in this case, soy has a bit of benefit because there are less traders, so it's more concentrated to talk to on the agenda. And then to go to the families producing. They were the implementing partners. The implement partners were all in Brazil, local, in the country itself. As George said, as an example, really country policies, really making national plans. So trying to go above competition and make an equal playing field for everyone. And the third one, which was also important, really honestly, truly independent party, third party in the country itself, verifying all things, managed and supported by FACS, and I think even Conservation International is part of it. Let me just open it quickly, the one where it is, and where it is on, yes, I think the sixth one here was an Environmental Committee, Nature Conservancy, WWF, UNEP, Conservation International, Pro Forest Rio, IPAM Amazonia. So it means there were really 6 of these experts looking at, is it serious? Does it benefit? How they measure it? It was measured through satellite geospacing image, and it was measured really on foot by control, by SIN. And it was not even so much about the whole communication. It was not a marketing gimmick, because that's a very interesting thing about it, that soy is basically basic staple food. It's a basic things used in many things. So it was not used like a premium product. It was not used like, okay, this is a beautiful coffee and we're getting it from here, so you pay. No, it was really paid out of the margins of the actors in the value chain. So it was not like an adding to the price, like another premium, like premium organic, premium fair trade, premium plus, plus, plus. No, it was taking out of the margin. And of course, what helped was that this facility, this financing facility of 47 million, there was, of course, a reduction in interest rate for doing this. So it was, of course, an incentive to the farmer to do this, to work on it. Okay, that's for the moment.
Brilliant. You've taken a very complex question and answered it really well, Michael. So we've had a question from Heru in Indonesia. So they've mentioned that it was interesting to hear both George and Michael speak about living income and the living income gap. So George, I was going to ask you, so how is this concept a meaningful stride for smallholders? And Hero has also pointed out that this is under 2 hectares. And yeah, particularly considering the way that coffee prices are set up. Yeah, they've also, Hero's also alluded to forward contract and future trading.
Thank you, Matt, for that. And I mean, if you ask me the same question before this particular project, I would answer it from a more theoretical point of view. But after the study that we did with smallholders in the Mount Kenya region of Nyeri, we realized, I mean, the concept of living income might not be that relatable with the farmers. But for us, then it becomes a way to gauge how far we are. Because if we have a goal of ensuring that farmers are prosperous, you need to be able to put some milestones in that journey to prosperity. And one of them is really contextualizing, the ability of the farmer's income to help him do some things that are basic, and then to help him do some things that are, of course, the question of prosperity. And maybe to answer from the context of a smallholder, we had this exercise at the World Coffee Producer Forum in Kigali, Rwanda. And we realized actually for the smallholder, you're at such a low place in your income that even thinking about prosperity beyond meeting your own needs is actually a concept. So coming back to then how we use that. So for the smallholders, we've seen one of the other things they look at, because that's their point of connection, is how much coffee they have and what price they receive for that coffee and how much total income they make. But we've realized the easiest way then to start bringing in the concept of income and also the journey towards prosperity is helping them look around, what did I get? And which is why we are having the connection with the Nairobi Coffee Exchange. What price did I get? And also because that price that they get, as one of the participants has mentioned, has many other things behind it, whether it's contracts, whether it's, the volatility of the market out there. But we want to start from where we can manage. So whatever I get, in relation to then what ends in my pocket. So there's the price that I get from giving my coffee, but there's also the part of what are my costs, what are what is my how optimal is my production. So given the resource that I have, like they mentioned, whether it's 2 hectares or some of the averages that we have of about half an hectare, how optimal am I with that resource? And then, just putting these things into context so that then they're able to see why we are looking at living income, because it's a journey towards a particular place. But they are also able to link it with things that they have every day. They have what they produce, they have the number of trees they have, and they have the price that they got at that particular time, because of course, and this is different over time. And if we are able to optimize that part, then in future we can talk about the other challenges beyond what we received as at the FOB. You know, asking ourselves whether the world market, is it too low, is it too high? But efficiency in that part, and that's the part that we managed to look at. And we found that these resonates with the smallholders, because they resonate them, how much more have gotten resonates with them in relation to all the other things that they're doing, because you realize most of the farmers are not just having coffee in this half an acre plot of land. So maybe they have milk and they have other things that in some instances, because in instances where coffee prices might be too low, some of these other activities to subsidize their coffee production. But it's that thing of getting us to look at the product, look at the challenges that were there in between, look at what we can change to minimize the gap, which is why living income as a measure then becomes important, because otherwise you would say, okay, we want to improve, but where do we want to improve to? And if we are able to get everyone to the living income, then of course aspiration then kicks in, and we are like, no, now we want farmers to be prosperous, but at least there has to be that particular measure. And so coming back to the question, I think the way that then farmers relate to the concept is the fact that then it's a measure that then helps you work towards a certain goal.
Brilliant, really, really interesting. Thank you for those insights, George. So we've had a question from Patricia. So I'm going to invite Michael and also Niels to jump in here. So she's asked two questions, following up with each other. She's asked, what is the role that you see for multilateral grant facilities? She gives the examples of Jeff and GCF in the new facility vis-a-vis de-risking capital to crowd in other financiers. Are you already working with these funds through UN implementing partners? So we'll kick off with that question.
I can be honest and very short, I have no clue. Sounds silly, but no, I know, of course, what you're talking about this global facilities, and we've been working with them in the past, but I think it would be much more honest to give you directly, somehow via Lauren or something, to give you the direct email address of my colleague of Agnes Johan. You also can find Agnes Johan. She's a specialist on the whole blended finance team and setting up these facilities. And sometimes they work with the guarantees additional, but often not. And sometimes it has a practical reason that the facility itself is already a multi-stakeholder facility in which you really want to bring in everyone's part of the risk. You know, it's not a free rider. There is no free lunch. There is no free lunch, there is no free rider. If you're in the coffee and you want to improve it and you share the same goal, you also have to participate and put your money where your mouth is. So also the coffee sector puts in facility, the trader puts in facility, the banks put in facility, there is someone putting blended finance, and all of them have a stake in it because we share the risk. That's the point. We share the risk and we share our knowledge. And then just to guarantee how wonderful, but they're not really part of that direct coffee chain. So here it's much more direct, who's at stake, who's running. So that's one, but I'll give you, please, Agnes knows much more the details also on your second part on how do this mixes. It's true, it's a mix of loans, it's a mix of loans and blended finance actually, which means it's not for free. They get a return. It only has to do, you know, you can structure it with first loss risk, second loss risk, third. So you structure it differently. But there is nothing about grants, absolutely not. Everyone puts in it, everyone runs the risk with it. I'll hand over to Niels, I think.
Yes. Yes, and yeah, thank you, Michael. For someone that honestly didn't know anything about that, you seem to yeah, answer a very interesting kind of conceptual overview. But I will pass you over to Niels.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as Conservation International, we're an accredited agency to the GEF and the GCF. So the positive news here is that both are increasingly interested in coffee. So under the GEF, so the Global Environment Facility, under the GEF 7 Food Systems Land Use and Restoration Program, the FOLA program, coffee was added to that. So FOLA is a $345 million program over 7 years with projects in 27 countries, of which 10 include coffee. So we were just last week in Nairobi for a regional workshop on cocoa and coffee with those countries that have those commodities in scope. So there's a tremendous opportunity within those countries that have coffee in their programs and now are all about to start, and all require private sector kind of match and co-funding to reach the scale that they want to have and set out to have. So that is under the GEF, and on the GCF, we are in the process of developing a global coffee effort with them, which would include 5 countries. So we're at the early stages of developing the full proposal for that. So if you know a little bit about GCF, you will know that that is going to be a multi-year effort to get that up and running. So stay tuned for that. And as part of that, we would include kind of a coffee fund or a coffee mechanism that looks into how do you attract different flows of financing, which would include both grants, but then also other types of finance. And I think a very important point here for the coffee industry at large, there is a lot of talk about blended finance and impact investment and all of that. And kind of to Michael's point, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Very important here is that we need to ensure that there is enough of a pipeline of bankable projects so that we can actually generate a return, so that we avoid that we establish these large funds and mechanisms that actually only can deliver on the best in class farmers that are the most well organized, whereas we're trying to get to those farmers that are the least organized and get them organized and into supply chains.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that follow-up, Niels. So this isn't a question, just flagging a comment in the chat from Hannah Lennett. So during George's presentation, she says, I don't want to be self-promotional, but we absolutely encourage that. And since you brought it up, George, she was just sharing that the Open Supply Hub is a free tool that can be used to get some of that landscape, so the landscape level cross-commodity collaboration and communication going. So she's posted a link to it in the chat. So if anyone's interested in that, please do explore it. So we have an interesting question from Ethan, and I was going to potentially direct this to Niels, but please, anyone else, do jump in if they fancy. Yeah, Michael has his hands raised, so please, yeah, we'll go to you as well. So he's asked, what are the main drivers and incentives for the private sector throughout the coffee value chain to engage in collective action and collaboration in the pre-competitive space? And he's specifically asked, are there any interesting case studies to refer to? Lauren has also raised her hand here, so we'll definitely go to you as well. Should we start off with Michael?
Sorry, I didn't want to take away Niels. I like that question. Thank you very much, Ethan. It's wonderful because for me, really, as Rabobank, 125 years bank, and coffee sector for 400 years, since 1608 in front of the gates of Vienna, it's very interesting and challenging what's happening now, because they must do from not only an internal ethical principle, but really this EU law on deforestation. A year before, but Lauren, help me, the German one, Nachhaltigkeit, 1 year earlier or something, the German law. So, and also the US is looking at it, and also other countries are looking at it. So there is a force, a public force to say, we don't accept any more deforestation, we don't accept any more loss of biodiversity. So there is this push really on collective action, and there is a real realization, especially, for example, what you already noticed, there is a difference in the sector in each role. One, of course, there are the brands. If you, shall not name anyone, Lauren. I shall not mention anyone, but there are the big round. Everyone knows George Clooney in the brand, so I didn't say the name. But you know, they have a brand, and they have a brand, loaded the brand with brand value, and because of that value, they need to do something about it. So in the programs, they need to do something about it. The same is with other brands. They need to do something about it. And so they understand that they cannot do it anymore alone, so they have to work together. I'll keep it there for Lauren and Niels. I'll keep it for the moment.
Yeah, Lauren, over to you. Please do jump in.
Sure, and thank you, Michael. I want to build on what you were just mentioning. I mean, the incentives are that these are challenges that no individual brand or supply chain can fix on its own. No one on their own is going to stop climate change. No one on their own is going to be able to ensure that farmers are more prosperous. How George was explaining, we're using living income as a way for measuring that progress. So you're starting to see many actors in the sector, and particularly members of the Global Coffee Platform, recognizing this. And over the past few years, we've been able to start piloting examples, as Ethan was asking for, of collective action. These have been called collective action initiatives. And just to give one quick example, and I'll try to add the link to the chat before we all wrap up in a few minutes, was looking at the use of agro inputs in Vietnam. So there are ones like glyphosate that are not allowed to be used if you are, or they're not allowed to go beyond the maximum residue limit if you're going to export to the European Union. And so the Global Coffee Platform and its work in Vietnam, the team in Vietnam, were able to pull together a number of different roasters and traders and other partners to work on a few different levels. First was on the policy level to help get glyphosate banned in Vietnam so that it matched the EU legislation. Second, to also work with farmers to identify alternatives that they could be using, to do heat maps to see where these inputs like glyphosate were being used beyond the MRL limit. And then to do trainings to be able to help farmers identify alternatives that were not too costly that they could do and then still have access to the market. And this logic is the foundation of the country plans that both George and I spoke about, of having been able to do these smaller specific projects on individual activities, having proof of concept for the sector that this approach can work and have much larger results than any individual company can have on its own, is then how we're going to be able to move forward and expand our reach, our scale, and start to address these major issues that we all talk about regularly and talk about doing collective action regularly, but need to start actually seeing a bit more buy-in to move that forward. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Niels, if you have anything to add, we have about a minute before we need to wrap up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All good. I think most have been said by Michael and Lauren. I would add that there's an increased business security and supply chain security needed, especially in the climate change realm. So beyond legislative process, really including climate change impacts within sourcing decisions. That's what we're seeing a lot. And then I think to tie into that, the question that came up around the forest frontier, we're definitely seeing with climate change impacting coffee production moving up to higher altitude, the risk of deforestation in coffee is just growing tremendously. So it's not like palm or soy where deforestation has been ongoing for a long time. It's really that future trajectory that needs to be incorporated. And then I'll close by saying, like, we're This session is actually part of a two-part session where in the second session that will be in November, we'll focus more on the industry side, so industry needs, and we'll highlight some of the findings of 3 reports from the Coffee Barometer that came out recently, the Global Coffee Platform Snapshot on sourcing, and then the Sustainable Coffee Challenge Hub report that looks at commitments in the sector. So kind of flip side of the same coin, looking at what's the demand of the industry actually. So a warm welcome to everyone to join that.
Thank you so much, and great that you flagged that event, Niels, in November. We'll be sure to share a link to that in an email round to registrants and anyone that's participated in today's event. Thank you all so much for joining. I'm also going to share a link to a Survey Monkey in the chat, and it would really help us if everyone took a couple of minutes just to share any feedback you had on today's event. But a huge thank you for everyone attending. I'm sorry we couldn't get round to all the questions. We have noted them all down, and if we're able to answer any and share them in our follow-up, then we will certainly do so. So this event has been recorded, and we'll also share that video with you. But a massive thank you to our speakers and our co-collaborators, the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community, that's FACS, and also the Global Coffee Platform. So yeah, a big thank you again, and take care, everyone. Goodbye.